chat. And at the end, all of response will be answered. And now I would like to ask Michał Kokowski, who is very distinguished Polish historian and philosopher of exact sciences, professor at the Institute for the History of Science, Polish Academy of Science, and the corresponding member of the International Academy of the History of Science, chair of the Commission on the History and Science and Technology, Polish Academy, and as well editor-in-chief on the journal Studia Historiae Scientiarum. So, Michał, floor is yours, and please keep the time 15 minutes for each of you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, everyone. I would like to present you. Okay, let's start. Okay. It was my first information about me. I have a problem, one moment, because I cannot. Okay, yes. The subject of my talk, the key problems in the history of science, almost no citations, black spots, Matthew effect, which I mean as a pathological science, and no real global dialogue. So let's go to the first point, almost no citations. We know that there are different citation traditions in natural science and history of science. In natural science, we have many citations. In contrast, in history of science, very little. And it's an example. It's information about top 100 journals based on journal citation report 2023, the highest impact factor journals in the world. For instance, the first place is taken by journal, Cancer Journal for Clinicians with impact factor 254.7. And for instance, in history of science, the best journal is a Bulletin of the American Museum of Natural History with impact factor 3.4. And ISIS, for instance, have 0.6 impact factor. The same situation is Scopus ranking 2023. We have Cancer, the same journal on the first position, Cancer Journal for Clinicians, indicated as SGR, have 56, about 56, and ISIS is a very limited number, 0.169. So it is a very bad situation from my point of view for in communication about our achievements everywhere in West, East, or different parts of world. Then let's go to a second point: blank spots. We know that there is something problem which is described as the so-called scientific neocolonialism and the geographic bias. And I give one example. The achievements of many scholars from Central Europe is still neglected by the so-called Western or Russian scholars. Why is this happening? It is impossible to imagine a situation in which researchers of Central Europe could have original achievements obtained independently of the achievements of representative of a so-called recognized research centers. And let's go to the third point, Matthew effect. For me, it's pathological science. And what is it, Matthew effect? The Matthew effect consists in not citing relevant publications and their authors, and instead citing the works of more media and well-known authors. Two alternative explanations of this phenomenon. One way, it is in sociological terms, we then treat it as a regularity of group behavior, the author of this interpretation is Robert Merton, or in ethical terms, as a form of theft. It is interpretation given by Stefan L. Wolf. And very important quotation from Stefan Wolf. Citation is not only a working technique, but also an ethics, the acknowledgement of obligations and respect for truth. I completely agree with Wolf in this respect. Okay, let's go to the my fourth point, no real global dialogue. During the Second International Conference of the European Society for History of Science, which was organized in Krakow, I presented the fundamental idea of this meeting. And I quote, "I would like to emphasize the central idea of our Krakow meeting. This is the idea of critical dialogue between Europe and other continents, between different parts of Europe, between different countries, both the big and the small, and finally, between the cycles of diverse languages, both national tongues and characteristic different disciplines." And during this conference, Professor Andrzej Wróblewski presented a plenary lecture entitled, "Are we ready for common history of science?" He analyzed problem of history of physics and different world history of physics written from perspective of different countries. And in this slide, we see such example for authors from Italy, Russia, Germany, and France. And in these 4 books, we have 1,444 names in total, but only 199 overlap in all these books. Only about 14%. It's very small number. Okay. And now I finish my talk, and I give additional note on the current political context. The list of participants of the World Festival of the History of Science and Technology does not include a representative of Ukraine, but does include a representative of Russia, the country which committed military aggression against Ukraine. I believe that this absence is a great loss to the community of historians of science and technology around the world. We must not forget about Ukraine and its representatives. And this is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for attention. And it's also, of course, bibliography. And I think we should discuss such problems. I think that they are very fundamental, and we should think about this in a global community of historians of science and technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michał. Yeah, it was very interesting talk. So I support your conclusion. And as well, from our point of view, it's quite important what you said. And thank you very much for keeping the time. Only one remark. I absolutely agree that it's necessary to have you as a representative of Ukraine. But since some years, there are not members of the HST, so they don't pay. We don't have contacts to any contact to Ukraine. We have tried to do it, yeah, but we didn't find feedback there. Yeah, so but in but I agree absolutely with your conclusion, but we can come to this back later in the discussion. So now to program, I would like to invite the next speaker, who is Jami, senior researcher at the CNRS in Paris. So very very distinguished colleague who did a great work in the DHST, because she was for 16 years member of the board of DHST and is at many positions. So her research, which is very important, focuses on the circulation of knowledge, especially of mathematics between Europe and China in the 17th and 18th centuries, on which she published extensively. Her current projects include the translation of a collection of notes on the investigation of things in the Kangxi Empire and the study of controversies of astronomy in Beijing in the middle of late centuries, on which she working jointly with Christopher Cullen. She is as well editor-in-chief of the journal East Asian Science, Technology and Medicine, published in Brill. So, and there are a lot of things which you can see about her work, but now I think I give the floor, and please, Katrin, you can start your talk.
Thank you very much, Milada, for your kind introduction. I am not, I'm speaking to you today not as a historian of East Asian science, but as somebody from the Standing Committee for Gender Equality in Science, and I'm going to really talk, partly part of my talk will be explaining what this is and what we do and what it's got to do with the history of science. So gender and the history of science and technology can be envisaged from, I think, two different angles. Of course, gender is relevant to the history of science and technology, and within DHST, the Commission on Women and Gender in the History of Science, Technology and Medicine has been doing very good and very important work for several decades. And I all invite you to listen to Don Opit's talk in session 19 about what this particular field is doing and where it's going at the moment. The other aspect, which is no less important, and is the issue of gender equality in our discipline amongst us. It's a question that needs addressing, as the issue of gender equality needs addressing everywhere in every society. And I would like to say a few words. You know, the question is, what has DHST done and what it is doing, either directly or via the union, of which it is a half. So the union is the International Union of History and Philosophy of Science and Technology, and what more can we do? So I'm just going to tell you how this issue has come into DHST and IUHPST. 6 years ago now, a project entitled The Gender Gap in Science, a Global Approach to the Gender Gap in Mathematical Computing and Natural Sciences, how to measure it, how to reduce it. This project started and it lasted for 3 years. IUHPST joined it. It was led by two other unions, the Union of Mathematicians and the Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. And there were also other unions joining. At the time, a number of scientific unions were already addressing the place of women in the discipline they represented and ways of promoting gender equality. Other, like IUHPST or DHST, joined the project because they thought it was important that they should be more proactive on the topic. This was the first international and interdisciplinary project run by scientists, meaning, you know, we were all basically representative of a scientific committee of scientific disciplines on that project addressing this issue. And this is in contrast with institutions telling us what to do or proposing policies that can indeed be very good. So that project undertook 3 tasks, and you can see them here, and we produced a book that you can download the one I would like to mention is the Global Survey of Scientists. Again, I invite you to read all the details, but the overall conclusion is that women's experiences in both educational and employment settings are consistently less positive than that of men. So you may say, oh, we knew that already, but the thing is, it's now backed by statistics, and I think that's quite One particular is that over a quarter of women respondents across the sciences reported personally experiencing sexual harassment at school, university, or work. And since there was also a divide by disciplines, I regret to say that our discipline, the history and philosophy of science and technology, had the record of the highest percentage of women who reported having personal experience of sexual harassment. So this is just, a little unpleasant figure that shows us why we need to address this issue. So one very interesting feature of that project is that we decided we needed to take into account diversity around the world. And for that purpose, before we launched the survey, there were 3 workshops, one in Africa, one in Latin America, and one in Asia. And this actually made us acutely aware of some issues, one of which is gender categories. Are they universal, and more down to earth? Are they universally accepted? And the answer to that is no. The workshop in Asia, when we were, showing the participant in the workshop how we wanted to phrase the question, several people told us, if you include more than 2 genders in the choice to answer what is your gender, no one in my country will feel able to answer this, because in some countries it is actually forbidden by the law to declare gender identity other than man or woman, male or female. So this is why in our final version we followed the UNESCO guidelines and just had 3 categories for gender, although by the standards of European countries, or maybe the United States, this may be regarded as not respectuous. So we have a dilemma here. It's an example of such a dilemma. It's not the only one. The other point is, how varied can the situation of women scientists be? And here I just quote this anecdote because I think it's really very revealing. In 2013, there was a career development workshop for women in science in Trieste. And one of the participants told the organizer, "This is the first conference of any kind that I have attended. This is the first conference my husband has allowed me to attend because I told him that only women would be there." So this may sound like a story from 2 centuries ago to us, but it's happening today in the world and international communities in which we live. And we need to be aware of that. On the other hand, it's not just that some countries are beautifully forward and others are backward, because we find that in countries that are not most visible on our radars, women are also creative in, how you can encourage girls to go to science. And for example, one colleague from Sub-Saharan Africa said that, well, once a month she goes to the local market, she stands on a crate and she gives a talk of, popular science. And because in her country, women run the stalls and women do the shopping, in fact, this is a wonderful place to address a female audience on the issue. So that's, so much for the worldwide diversity of situations and possibilities. So when the project concluded, we decided we had created a wonderful network and we wanted to make it permanent. And this is why we set up the Standing Committee for Gender Equality in Science, on which I represent our union, IUHPST, and also of which I am the first chair. So we founded this committee during the pandemic, all on Zoom, and it's an independent partnership between international scientific organizations, most of which are members of the International Science Council. One joins this standing committee by signing an MOU, and this MOU contains a number of commitments by partner, including to actively promote gender equality in their organization and in their discipline. And this can be done, amongst other things, by applying the recommendations that concluded the Gender Gap in Science project. So as I mentioned, IUHPST is a founding partner, and it's also interesting that the first chair is a historian of science, because it makes history of science visible in a way that I think it has not been before to a number of scientific disciplines, and I will come back on this. So Firstly, what does this Standing Committee for Gender Equality in Science do? It ensures liaison across disciplines on issues related to gender equality, so we can exchange information and ideas about ways to promote gender equality. And there's a lot of diversity and creativity amongst the unions about what they do. We have also set up a series of webinars to reach out beyond unions officers and union members to colleagues and students across disciplines and around the world. And these webinars have been, for most of them, organized in turn by unions. IUHPST organized a webinar last autumn. And for example, when the mathematicians organized a webinar, there were more than 800 people who attended. And contrary to what happens in our discipline, Africa was well represented amongst the audience, which is always interesting. So these webinars are still available on the SCGES YouTube channel, and you can register to get more information on future webinars. So this is a list of the 23 partners of SCGES. You can find them online, and you can see that disciplines are varied. And what is interesting is that we started with basically only mathematics and natural sciences, and now we are having anthropologists and political science who have also joined. So we are beginning to have more social science that are entering on the committee. So last but not least, what can we as a union and as a division do? The first thing is to gather gender informed data, such as participant in congresses, statistics of shared symposia. This is important because studies have shown that women who are in the audience ask more questions when the panel is chaired by another woman. Also statistics on plenary speaker, and also we could gather data from a member society and our commissions. We have started to do that for the 26th of our Congress, which was held virtually but run by our colleagues in Prague. And I'm pleased to acknowledge that Milada and her colleague did a wonderful job, and they collected gender statistics so that we know for the first time that you can see the figures, almost 38% of participants declared to be women, almost 59% declared to be men, and 3.69% of participants preferred not to disclose upon registration. The local organizing committee and international committee were, as you can see, well balanced in gender, and this is not by chance. This is because attention is paid to that. Same goes for speakers at plenary sessions. There is a more than a reasonable gender balance. So these are the first figures we have from our professions. And of course, we would need to have more figures beyond congresses, because there must also, as we know from other disciplines, be a gender bias on attendance of to congresses, not only in the case we saw whether a woman is allowed to go, but whether she is able to go, she has funding, family obligations, allow her to, etc. So this is something we have begun to do and we should continue to do. The issuing of a code of conduct, we held a webinar on this. It's quite important. DHST has got a respectful behavior policy, and I think that this policy should also be enforced in its commissions, in all the activities of its commissions, because when work has been done, it should be useful for as widely as possible. It's also recommended to devote a plenary session to gender equality in each Congress. And again, in Prague, there was such a session. There was none actually, however, on the recent Congress of DLM PST. It should be possible to have a working group on gender equality in the union and the discipline. At the moment, there is a gender champion in DHST, and there is going to be a gender champion at the level of at IUHPST, but I think working collectively is also interesting. It should also be possible to have a web page devoted to the issue so that historians of science and technology interested can find resources on this issue. And last but not least, I have found by interacting with colleagues in the various scientific disciplines represented that they are extremely interested in what history of science and technology can tell them about the situation of women in science and gender in science. And therefore, this I will conclude where I have started. The work done by our colleagues of the Commission on Women and Gender in Science and Technology and Medicine is extremely valuable. And so it's not just about looking at what we do, but it's also using what some of us do to help, define and implement good practices for gender equality in all the disciplines of science. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Catherine, for your important report or paper, which pointed out so many important issues in gender equality in science. And thank you for your work as chair of the Standing Committee in Gender Equality. So I am sure that will be questions after the last paper, which now will be presented by Sarah Hijmans. She is historian and philosopher of chemistry, interested in experimentation and reasoning practices in the 19th century European chemistry. We stay in Europe. Yeah, she is working now in Great Britain, if I'm sure. So because she is now a short-term fellow in the Science History Institute, free prize fellow at the Royal Institute of Great Britain, and visiting student of the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at University of Cambridge. Yeah. And she is as well serving as a secretary for the Commission on the History and Chemistry and the Molecular Sciences since 2 years already. So Sarah, your time is now.
Thank you. Yes, so indeed, I'm here as in my role as secretary of the Commission on the History of Chemistry and the Molecular Sciences. And I just wanted to start with a remark saying that I will be referring to the history of chemistry, but I mean that in the broadest sense, so that really expands into the history of molecular and material sciences, alchemy, biochemistry, technology, health, life sciences, and probably many other fields. So I will use chemistry, but that's really just for brevity's sake, especially since we have also molecular sciences in our title. So on behalf of the CNRS, I would really like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to speak here, but also for their work in organizing the festival. So when we received this invitation about a year ago, we took it as the occasion to really start a discussion within our community. So we organized 4 roundtables and 2 panels during international conferences that took place this summer. And these panels and roundtables united speakers from various career stages, different backgrounds, and we discussed a lot of different topics. So I can't summarize everything here, of course, but I just want to highlight some of the points that came forward and their implications for the future of the history of chemistry. So firstly, many of our panelists agreed on a peculiarity of the history of chemistry that results from the nature of chemistry itself. So chemical practice has always had strong links to artisanal practices, industry, other economic endeavors, and historians of chemistry are therefore forced to occupy a kind of middle ground between internal and external questions, so to speak. So writing the history of chemistry is very different from writing something like the history of high energy physics, which will be much more constricted to a particular context. So to put it briefly, chemistry is kind of everywhere. It goes really from the elite scientific circles to the most seemingly mundane kitchen operations. So from quite early on, historians of chemistry have studied material culture, laboratory and experimental practice, but also different kinds of industry, political and commercial applications as well. So a current example is the emerging field of the history of knowledge, in which historians of chemistry also play a role. And for many historians of chemistry, these topics are kind of taken for granted and not always treated as something completely new. Similarly, the history of chemistry has a way of being very easily introduced into a variety of topics. So this happens especially when one is starting from problem-based questions like how did scientists solve the question of temperature, or how have different colors been produced throughout history. And once we start by asking these kind of problem-based questions, chemistry necessarily sneaks into the story. So the result is that history of chemistry is able to blur a lot of boundaries and to make a lot of connections with other fields within history of science, but also even more broadly. So a look at recent special issues of the journal Ambix, the History of Chemistry journal Ambix, shows this very clearly. There are authors from various horizons and backgrounds that are contributing and collaborating with each other. And to cite just one example, recently they published a special issue called Gold and Mercury, Amalgamated Histories in Chemistry, Culture and Environment, which was edited by Donna Bilek and born from her work as a practicing goldsmith. So this is really an interdisciplinary work. We also regularly see new people from outside of the field joining History of Chemistry gatherings, which is always really wonderful. And many of our panel members also said that they really hugely benefited either from collaborations outside of the field or by adopting interdisciplinary methods themselves in their own work. So these trends give at least one very clear view for the future of the history of chemistry as being characterized by interdisciplinarity and by collaborative efforts. But this is, of course, not the only conclusion. And the second point I would like to make is kind of related to the first, because I want to highlight why I think history of chemistry will continue to be relevant. Precisely because the history of chemistry has blurry boundaries and lies at the intersection of different fields, it really has the ability to make connections that otherwise might not be made. So, for example, history of chemistry can really provide new kinds of narratives. So I mentioned kind of, materiality and material culture, but there are other examples. So our panelist, Victoria Lee, for example, has shown how attention to the history of chemistry, in her case specifically fermentation science, can provide new insight even into the history of biology. Her work has shown that in the early 20th century, nucleotides and amino acids were not only studied in the US as a way to understand the structure of organisms through their DNA, for example, but also researched for their flavor in East Asia. The most well-known example of that is, of course, MSG. So her research places the history of biological solutions to sustainability also in a new historical context by highlighting this longer history of the biological production of chemicals. In a similar way, history of chemistry can help form a bridge between different communities that do not necessarily talk to each other. Marcin Krasnodębski, for example, works on the different ways in which chemists themselves have adopted environmental language in their work. And he studies these different frameworks, disambiguates them and contextualizes them, and thereby makes connections between different communities of chemists who do not always talk to each other otherwise. Likewise, Paulina Gennerman, in her PhD, has shown how labels such as natural or synthetic are interpreted and judged quite differently by different audiences. So her historical work bridges a gap of misunderstanding between scientists, industry, and consumers. And therefore, history of chemistry can really be of use. It can really be important also for society. So I will cite yet another example, the work of José Ramón Bertomeu Sánchez and his colleagues at the Institut López Pinheiro in Spain, where they work on the history of toxic products, touching on questions like regulations, expertise, ignorance, and activism. And their work is not only interdisciplinary, but also of great societal relevance because, not just because they work on these topics, but also because they carry out oral history interviews to record communities which are not always listened to otherwise. So based on these examples, I would like to add a second vision for the future, which is that of continued relevance. So history of chemistry appears to be a perfect field to study questions which are very pressing today, such as sustainability and environmental concerns, and to place them into historical context. It can therefore be of importance to various audiences within the academic world and also outside. But these ideals for the future also come with challenges. The first being really the responsibilities for the historian of chemistry and probably historians in general, such as that of including actors and communities which are not often heard. So I cited one example, and we do really see a trend towards a shift in narrative away from classical history centered on great men to include a variety of otherwise overlooked actors, and often this includes also women. So it's already visible in recent publications and conference programs, but to echo the previous speaker, there's still a lot of work, of course, there to be done. Likewise, and here I would also like to echo the first speaker, is that there is definitely also this geographical bias in history of chemistry, and there are still a lot of connections to be made when it comes to global history. So great work is already being done, for example, on global circulations of materials, and there are various examples that I could also cite here. But as we discussed with our panelists, they really saw a separation between the history of chemistry community and other academic fields. So one example that we discussed is the lack of overlap between history of science and the history of East Asia, which leads to certain blind spots. And I'm sure that there are other examples of this. So lastly, we see a third challenge when it comes to bridging the gap between different kinds of audiences for history of chemistry. So even for those who might have direct interest in history of chemistry, such as chemists themselves or teachers of chemistry, it can still be quite difficult to really access current historical knowledge. So one of our roundtables united Annette Liknes, Jesse Smith, and Philip Ball on this question of audiences. And we had a very interesting discussion on the different needs of different audiences. So whereas curators like Jesse can benefit from cutting-edge historiographical debates and kind of help translate these to a wider audience, this can be a lot more complicated for teachers who do not always have the time. They do not always have the tools to keep up with scholarly literature on history, and sometimes even texts that might appear accessible to historians aren't always that easy to grasp to other readers. So our conversation really showed that there is a need for more dissemination of historical knowledge on chemistry. So all of these challenges are kind of related to very fundamental questions, such as for whom are we writing history? What is the role? What is the duty of the historian? What are their main aims? And my personal hope for the future of the history of chemistry, and I'm probably not the only one in this, is that we will continue to keep such fundamental questions in mind as we advance. So if I still have some time, I would just wanted to show quickly a slide so some of the names that I cited will be, more clear to everyone. So these are the people that I cited and some of their works, just to give you a few seconds to look at those. And then this was the program. Oh, if I can pass the, yes. So this was the program for the first few roundtables that we organized in preparation for this event. And they've all passed, but we've recorded them, and soon they will be available on our website to look back in case you would be interested. So thank you very much. And this is all from me.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So now is time for general discussion, or you can prepare your question. First, maybe I would like to read one feedback which we have now on the chat. And there is feedback on Katrin paper from Sonia Štrbaňová. She is past female president of European Society for History of Sciences. Her remark is there is one typical characteristic on the lower social status of women scientists, which is usually omitted or forgotten in various reports. Women statistics obtains much less official acknowledgement than the men scientists. I mean, for instance, medals, honorary membership, honorary doctorate prizes, etc. This should be pointed out in surveys, noted in statistics, and put right too. So it was reflects to Katrin, if she wants to react.
Yes, thank you very much, Sonia, for being here and for your remarks, which I think are very important. So firstly, I think that you are drawing attention to, in fact, a major issue, which is visibility. Women do science. There have always been women doing science, but they are they are not made visible enough. And indeed, if you try to assess the presence of women in science, say by the list of Nobel Prizes, it's a bit, it's both depressing and inaccurate. This being said, so there are things one can do about it. When we compiled data for DHST, we also looked at the, gender balance for the prizes awarded by DHST. So in terms of the dissertation prize over the last 5 years, 62% of recipients are women and 38% are men. Of course, there we will also need next time to collect data about the gender of people who who are submitting their dissertation for a prize. For the IUH-PST essay prize, the numbers are too small to do percentages, because there are so far 5 people who have been awarded the prize, 2 of them jointly, but I think there is also some balance there. And I will, if I think of the example of another discipline, physics, well, for the last Nobel Prizes awarded, there were 0 women nominated. That's always something that can happen, but Nobel Prizes are not awarded by International Union, and the International Union of Pure and Applied Physics has decided that if no women were nominated for the prizes they award, the prize would not be awarded. So I think that is things we must keep in mind, that there are strategies for putting things right, but one has to be proactive about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. Michał had a question or remark. You're muted.
Thank you very much. I have very important question to Professor Jami. I really, the number which you listed, 39% women informed about sexual harassment, and in this branch, in our branch, I'm shocked. It is very tragic information, and I have a question about specific this statistical information regarding different countries. First of all, I'm not an expert of this matter. I do not study gender issues. However, in Poland, I do not see such great gender problems in our discipline, history of science. But you stated this number, 39%. You think about what countries? It's a general number or specific countries. It is very important, and we should very carefully consider this issue. It is very important matter, and I would like interested in details. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. As you say, yes, it's a shocking figure. So it was done just a few hundred people who answered the survey, so I don't know how representative it is, but I still think it's worth quoting the figure. We don't have a country breakup for history of science. However, on the general survey, the answers showed that there are no countries that are fundamentally better than others or worse than others. It is not the case that in Western developed and enlightened blah, blah, blah countries, the situation is better. No, it is not. And I think that DHST has already responded by producing a respectful behavior policy, and by implementing it. This is why I suggest that this policy should be implemented in all meetings of history of science that are sponsored by DHST, because it's really crucial. And if I may say, you say you do not see problems of gender in your country. I think that is very characteristic. People of goodwill do not see these problems. It's, you know, women are not less visible than men, and it is not, no, the question is not visible unless one really looks at it specifically, and one wouldn't, I mean, if you are able in Poland to conduct a survey, I mean, we could work on that with you, and we could also send it to all national committees, have surveys to see what the situation is like country by country, because of course, at different levels, we can do different things. You know, in Poland, you can also make recommendations through universities and research institutions, which is not possible at an international level. So I think it really different levels must cooperate on this. Thank you.
Okay. One additional remark. I'm not a representative case because I haven't contacts with a great community. So in fact, I have really no knowledge about this issue, very important issue. But in our institute, for instance, a special commission for gender equality. So I will contact with them about these statistics, because it is a very serious problem and it should be solved very quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. So if I can enter this interesting discussion. So Catherine is somewhere published or preparing a list of the cases, anonymous, of course, cases of this sexual harassment and these gender problems in different countries, because I think it's considered as well different in different countries from point of view of religion, background, and so on. So if you have just a general overview, or if it is some sophisticated, or how to say it, yeah, I mean Catholic countries, Islamic countries, so and so on. I think this.
But from what I remember from the general survey, certainly the dominant religion of the country does not make any difference, and the situation is not necessarily better in our countries. Maybe it's becoming slowly easier to talk about it, but it's and also, you know, there also have been social scientists studying what is sexual harassment, and in fact we are mainly talking about, in fact, sexist harassment.
It is what I mean, because it is in different countries considered a different way. So if somewhere should be here a list of concrete anonymous cases, what's considered as, so maybe it could be helpful to countries where this matter is not so developed, so where it's not yet spoken about so in detail. And
okay, thank you. I will
as well about the historical development of the countries, or such project also. Thank you. It was just my remark. And if I may ask Michał, so was very interesting this overview of book with different names of scientists, and this overlapped. Have you published already about it, something? I mean, this your slide where were mentioned 4 books about history of physics in Europe, and there was
yes. This slide was taken from lecture by Professor Wróblewski, and of course it was published in our Congress book.
Because it's very interesting.
It is very interesting, very important, and very statistical.
It shows differences,
very precise, because
between different countries, and
of course these differences are caused by a different view of about the history of physics, written from different sides, different countries. So it may be justified that there are a very small number of names which are repeated in all books. However, it must be checked whether it was caused by political and very nationalistic approach. So therefore, it is very important to consider this issue in detailed way. And this slide, this idea, which author is Professor Wróblewski, is very good it's a very good instrument to measure the problem, indicate these issues. Yeah.
Very much. And if I may, last question from me for Sarah. So it was a very interesting paper. Thank you for it. And I would like to ask your work in commission on the history of chemistry and your collaboration with Brigitte van Tigel, and how far you are influenced by her research work as well, or are you colleagues only in the commission?
Yeah, so I mean, she's doing really great work, and yes, I would certainly say that I'm influenced by it, especially the book with Annette Lieknes on the women in their element, it's called, from 2019, was very important also for my research. And yes, I mean, it's great also to work with, we work together.
Very well working commission. And I see you have question for Michał.
Yes, I do. Thank you. So I wanted to ask you about the these numbers regarding impact factors and ranking of journals. Is it possible that the size of the research community plays a role in that, and if so, is there a way to correct for that sort of in citation factor, or is it even, you know, if we sort of adjust according to size, is the difference then still as big?
Well, first of all, I criticize numbers and scientometrics, bibliometrics. I wrote many articles about very extended. However, there is great differences between our disciplines, between natural sciences and history of science. Really, it's true. Scholars representing natural sciences quote many times than scholars in history of science, and this is very dangerous for us discipline, because our achievements are even if these achievements are very great, other people do not know about them at all. So these numbers, impact factor, and criticize this in other articles. However, in this aspect, show very dangerous phenomenon. It's dangerous for our discipline. We should change it. We should quote much. We should remember about authors which we read and then quote them. It is very important. I observe very dangerous phenomenon that people even knew the work of some scholars, do not cite them in their own works. And we should change it. It's not only professional matter, but on an ethical question. Very important problem. Of course, I agree that sexual harassment is a tragic problem, but also in our branch, we also have very important another problem. We do not quote properly other people. We should change it. Thank you.
Thank you. Here are two more reactions. So we have some few last minutes. So first, Josef Simon Castel, congratulations to Sarah and Catherine for their talks and perfect work. So, and there is one last question probably for Sarah from Ariana Borelli. So she is historian of physics and she is asking the relationship between chemists and historian of chemistry, because in physics and historian of physics have difficult relations. So how it is in chemistry is she asking, and it will be our last question and response.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, so there is definitely a changing relation, I would say, between chemists and historians of chemistry. So traditionally there was very, very large overlap between historians of chemistry and chemists, and most historians were also practicing chemists. And it seems like this is kind of changing, or at least a part of history of chemistry is moving more towards history of science and even closer to history, in general. And yeah, that definitely means that there are new questions, because the aims are not always the same. For chemists, also, want to really write the history of their own discipline. But it seems that relatively there's still a lot of contact. There are now a lot of chemistry journals that also publish historical articles themselves, often still written by chemists. So yeah, there is, a relationship that I think we need to think about. And for example, in organizing and publishing the program for these roundtables, some people reached out to me and asked why we didn't invite any practicing chemists. And so we do plan on having, if we continue this roundtable series, on having a roundtable also on this question of, the contact between these two different communities and how everyone sees that. So yeah. Okay,
but there was still one bonus question from Catherine to Sarah. 1 minute, Catherine. Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I think you mentioned the too small overlap between history of East Asia and history of science.
Yes, yeah, it was discussed in one of our...
I invite you to contact there is a commission on DHST, of which I have been chair, of which I'm a member. There has been a conference, 400 historians of East Asian science have met in Frankfurt last month. The present president of this society, that is a member of DHST, has done a PhD on the history of chemistry in Japan. So there are lots of people, it's just you haven't reached out to them, and I encourage you to do so.
Yes, yeah, apologies, I may have phrased it in a wrong way. I know a lot of work being done, yeah. And I didn't mean to generalize it that much. But thank you for pointing that out.
Well, thank you to all. We really explored all 1 hour. So thank you to being here. So, and I'm sorry, I have now to say goodbye because from backstage. So we are asked to finish. So you can continue. So in the foyer, your discussion, and was happy to see you. Have a nice day and goodbye. Session is
I think we are live. So welcome everybody to this 12th session of the Global Festival for the Division for the History